Why can't you just bring them back?
Goodbye, Marcus.
Wait!
When I said my Annie was being tortured, this was a joke. And a lie, and a lie, and a lie, and a lie, and a lie.
Hello to all those innies and outies out there, and welcome to my deep dive breakdown and review of Severance Season 2, Episode 2. Now, the title of this week's episode should have been called Lying because there was a lot of lying going on. That seemed to be the main theme, but there's also many questions that come to mind about who is Mr. Drummond, who was Irvin on the phone with, where is Cobell going, and was that really Helly or Helena? This show just continues to have me hooked on every single little detail, and I love it. Now, after we got our Any exclusive episode last week, we get a chance to catch up with what the Outies were up to, which confirms Milchick lies to Outie Mark. With that said, the board approved my request to discuss this episode, spoilers ahead. We open this episode with immediately seeing Outie Mark back after the OTC ended and everyone looking at him after yelling, "She's alive." Devin knows that Outie Mark is present and questions if he's okay, and they have a bit of a laugh after he calls her Persephone, who is the queen of the underworld in Greek mythology. Mark notices that he's holding the picture of him and Gemma from their wedding, but at the moment, neither Mark nor his sister question who he was referring to about "she's alive," which is actually smart on Devin's part to not panic during this moment because she read the room and realized it probably isn't safe to question who Mark was referring to, knowing now that Lumon can be anywhere. Now back at Lumon, we see Helena rubbing her neck. To me, I read her doing this as a reminder to what Heliar did to them with the rope in the elevator situation, but the rubbing of the neck could be a reminder of for any Helly having had done something bad that affects Helena, or you could read this as what we'll be discussing later. I think that Helena might actually be jealous of Heliar. Now here we meet who I assume is the family's personal bodyguard, or at least someone important to the family, Mr. Drummond. More on him a little bit later, but let's talk about who walks in next, and that's Helena's father and current CEO, Jane Egan. As he walks closer to her, you can see the look of disgust on his face as he calls his daughter Fetid Moppet, Fetid meaning foul-smelling or stinky, and Moppet meaning child, specifically young girl, so he's basically calling her a smelly child. Now, was he referring to Helena even though she had no control over what happened and he's embarrassed, or was he knowingly doing this to use her as the face but was directly talking to her any Helly? Either way, I'm really hoping that we see more of this very strange and odd father and daughter relationship this season. Now, Jane leaves the room in pure disgust and embarrassment after what happened, and Helena and Mr. Drummond agree that someone from the floor should immediately find the Outies to see what they know. Now, I want to take a moment to just highlight how remarkable these actors are when they're separating the personalities of their innies and their outies, and having the ability to essentially play in dual roles. Now, we've obviously saw a bit of Helena in season 1, and we spent more time with her in this episode, but the differences between the two are night and day, and I just feel the change of Helena's tone, especially when she's around her father, and it's deeply serious. Now, Helly can be serious, we saw that in season 1, but not as dry and cold as Helena. To me, Helly's more natural in the way she carries herself, where Helena is so robotic and so corporate and by the book. From here, we see Dylan leaving work after hours with an ice pack on his head as Milchick watches from afar. Now, imagine the ice pack was because of Milchick tackling him and he probably bumped his head, but I bet it was never a thought to give Dylan a note or a gift card explaining the injury like they normally do. Now we see Helena has Milchick do the job of gathering information about what the Outies may have said and who they might have said it to. Now Milchick questions if he should fire them as she tells him to let Kier guide his hand in making that decision. Now look, we all know about the iconic season 1 Helly walk, but can we talk about the Helena walk? I mean, it's not as swaggy as Helly, but I mean, she's got a little bit of swag there. It's a little stiff, but she definitely demands your attention. And I absolutely love the tracking shot of following her as she enters the room with Cobell. Now, this is the first time we actually see Helena and Cobell sharing a scene together, and man, it felt like a scene out of a Bond movie with two socially awkward villains conversing. As Helena tells Cobell that they've already gathered any and all footage taken from their guests, the Severance employees are being dealt with, and Natalie has already taken actions for the media outreach to begin to explain what and why Helena, to them, did what she did. as Helena thanks Cobell for acting quickly and warning them about the Innie's actions. Now Cobell lets her know that her actions cost her dearly. I'm assuming she's referring to being outed on her role in Lumon and ending her double life side mission with Mark, something that we know wasn't approved by the company, which costed her her job. Helena appreciates her continued loyalty despite being fired and wants her to return. Now Cobell plays it smart, and this really shows how she isn't as complicit as other managers within the company and just believes everything about the company, as she wants an apology first. Now on behalf of herself, the board, and her father, Helena apologizes and recognizes they've treated her poorly. Now you see this slight reaction from Cobell. It's almost like she was thinking in her head like, oh, okay, I didn't expect an apology. But as she accepts the return, she follows it up with a game plan to take back control of the office, but Helena's got bigger plans for her.
Severance Advisory Council.
As she offers her a new position within the company, a position new to Cobell, as she's told it's a new initiative and she'll be leading the way in its formation. Now we don't hear anything else about this new role for the rest of the episode, but I wonder what it all entails. Will she be relocated? Will she be overseeing another branch? Will she be making new rules and regulations for Innies at work? And by the end of the episode, did we see her make her decision and leaving and taking the position? Now we see that Cobell would rather keep her old job, and my guess is she wants to keep tabs on her little side project with Gemma and Mark. Now Helena informs her that Milchick now has her old job, and you can see that Cobell isn't a fan of that decision, and I bet it's because she still feels as though that he played a hand in her initial firing, as it was suggested back in season 1 with her confronting Natalie. Now Cobell says they don't actually value her after learning this, but instead they fear her, which Helena reminds her that they fear no one. Now Helena doesn't take her comments as disrespect, but tells her that they hold her to a high regard, hence the promotion, as Cobell tells her that she'll think about this new position. Now as Cobell leaves the room, she refuses to have Mr. Drummond walk her out, and you'll see this little hand gesture by Helena to Mr. Drummond. It's almost like she was saying to him for her to let her go and think she's in control, but definitely keep an eye on her. Now we cut to Helena putting on her game face as she's with Natalie, who's about to record her apology to the guests at the gala. Now her reason for what led her to saying what she said at the gala was due to a poor decision by consuming alcohol while on a non-Lumon medication for an arm rash. Now this once again confirms that Lumon definitely has their hand in the pharmaceutical business. Now this is probably a nothing burger, but notice the keys on the keyboard. Everything looks normal to me, but this key that says memory, now I'm sure this may have something to do with the recordings of the videos and saving the recordings, but could it have something literally to do with a person's memory being altered after recording? Or like on some Men in Black stuff, could it affect those viewing and altering or wiping their memory of the video details that even occurred? Now during all this, we watch Milchick as he goes to the Audie's houses. Now we get a chance to look at Milchick's cool bike, and I think this is the first time we saw his bike in the show, and may I also add that this being like the second time that I can remember seeing someone with a more modern vehicle, or a bike in this case, because most of the ways of transportation that we've seen have been retro. Now you'll notice the license plate has the same saying we've seen on Mark's and Irvin's license plate, which says Remedium Holinibus, which in Latin translates to cure for men or a remedy for mankind, which could point to the idea of Lumon wanting their severance chips to be a means of curing mankind from themselves and using the chip to cure their Audie's imperfections. Now Milchick first arrives to Irvin's house. Now Irvin's Audie lies about his whereabouts of the evening and doesn't tell him that his Innie paid a visit to Bert. Now of course his Innie did this, but we obviously know that his Audie woke up and had to drive home after, so he wasn't home like he told Milchick. Now Milchick knows that he's lying and tells Irvin that his Innie is a friend of his and a man of principle, which makes his decision of firing him very difficult. Now his next visit is to Dylan, who is told that he was involved in a physical altercation at work and he was the aggressor, and he also gets fired as well. Now Dylan's reaction is much different from Irvin's, and I believe that has to do with the fact that he has a family, and as we learn later, he actually has a newborn child. Was it me, or was there a swiftness to the way Milchick's tone was to Dylan when firing him, and of course the lie being that he was the aggressor? I think Milchick's approach towards Dylan has to do with the fact that him and Dylan haven't had the best relationship since the first OTC incident at his house, and most likely isn't a fan of Dylan's Innie, especially after being bitten by him as well. Now we cut between Helena giving her speech, which talks about the company's importance of trust and how there's been a perception of dishonesty about them, and how her words truly hurt many people. Now, as this is being said, we see how Irvin and Dylan try to understand what happened and having the narrative tie into what Helena's speech is about, which again is about lies and deception. As Irvin offers to pay cash to fix whatever he did, we see Dylan is worried about what he's going to tell his wife. As Helena ends her speech by saying,
I'm committed to this company with every part of me, but I'm also human, just like my Annie. And just like you.
Now, I do want to point out how Helena sat back in her chair after her message. It almost felt like she was playing the role of the company person who's putting on this face, but those words really didn't mean anything to her. I also wonder how often Helena has to make these type of videos, because it didn't seem like her first rodeo making an apology video on her behalf. It makes me wonder if Helena has a history of making mistakes that make the company look bad. Now, I can't forget to mention how I was right and how we were all right in that Milchick was lying to any Mark, and that lie being that he didn't fire the others and the Outies refusing to come back to work. Now, I was so happy to see the return of the opening credits, and it's a brand new one as well. Now, there's a lot to discuss about this new opening sequence here, and at the time of this recording, I've hopefully already made a separate video that may be available now or available soon to watch, but I have a lot of thoughts and theories about these new things that we see happening in this new sequence, and I gotta say, it's pretty freaking awesome and incredible and very interesting. And I'm going to be honest, I think I like it more than the original one from season 1 because it is way more creepier. Now, back with Mark, we hear the strangest comment by Rebecca, who tells Rickon to not punish the baby because it wasn't its fault. Now, we know all his friends are weird, but why did she call the baby an it, and what exactly did she mean by not punishing the baby? Now, inside, Devin and Mark talk about what any Mark yelled out, and Mark's in denial about what was said, but particularly who it was about. Now, Rickon steps in and believes Mark was referring to his newborn niece, who at the time was believed to have been taken, and Mark agrees with him, but Devin isn't completely on board with this idea. Now, Rickon also lets Mark know just how much of a fan he is of his Annie and how much of a fan Annie Mark is of his work. Now, I can't be the only one who has suspicious thoughts about if Rickon may have ties with Lumon, right? Now, I've always had the thought in the back of my mind that him and his weird friends pretend to be against Lumon and the Severance program, but what if they have their own chips inside of them or take something that changes their Outies into more of who they want to be? It's just a thought that I've always had since meeting Rickon back in season 1, and I just don't know if I can trust him. Also, is it just me, or do him and Devin just seem to be the complete opposites? But again, I guess they say opposites attract. Now, Rickon shares his 2 cents about why Mark's Annie did what he did to express some possible abuses, but the doorbell rings and it's Milchick. Now, Milchick introduces himself to Devin, and I forgot how great of a supporting character she is and how great of a sister she is to Mark, because even with Milchick's wholesome smile and his nice personality, or pretending to be nice personality, she doesn't buy it and looks right at him and doesn't give him a response when he acknowledges her, and she smartly covers up Gemma's picture as they're talking as well. Now, as Milchick explains what happened, he goes over the OTC contingency to Mark's surprise. He also tells them that Mark's Annie's co-worker was responsible for turning on the switch, and it was on for a total of 39 minutes. Now, side note here, the finale of last season actually came in at exactly 40 minutes for the runtime, leaving 1 minute for credits, and now we know that all that was happening in the finale was happening in real time. Which just goes to show, man, I just love the attention to detail within this series. But Devin tells Milchick she spoke with Mark's Annie, but refuses to say what she spoke of in fear that any Mark would be punished, which we see Milchick lies as he normally does and says that there's no punishments within the company. Again, Devin smells the lies coming from Milchick, and when he tries to question Mark, she steps in and mentions if Lumon had any hand in Colbell's actions as a fake. Now, Milchick makes sure they know that her actions were of her own accords and promises that she'll never step foot in the office again, nor will she bother him in the outside world again as well. Now, Milchick questions if there's anything else Mark would like to share, but Mark picks up on the game that his sister's playing, and he tells him that he has nothing else to share. Now, Mark also shares that he might not be returning to work on Monday, as Milchick puts in the mind games and tells him,
"What your Annie did tonight was completely unauthorized. It was also very brave."
Now, Mark returns home and sees Colbell's car in the driveway, and he knocks on her door, but she doesn't answer. Now, this next part fuels my recent theory I shared, and something I mentioned earlier about Helena possibly being jealous of her Annie's life. We watch as Helena rewatches the tape of Mark walking in the hallways and watches the last conversation between Ennie's Helly and Mark. She watches it like a sitcom and even has a little bit of a laugh when they're talking about the coupons, and as she watches and they say their goodbyes and we know that they kiss and she sees that, she switches from another angle of them and pauses it and rewinds it and watches it again, and I love the close-up on her eye. To me, I love this close-up because it really makes me believe that Helena is indeed jealous of her Ennie's romance. It makes me think that she agreed to be severed not just for the betterment of the company, but to create this other version of herself to experience a different life. Now, I've stated this before, I believe Helena most likely lives a life with little to no surprises, and she has this big responsibility of being an Egan and having to be the next in line to take over the company after her father's revolve. I would even bet that Helena's love life is non-existent. She sees her Ennie living a life of adventure and love and affection, and she's jealous of her not having to live this everyday burden of being an Egan. And listen, ladies and gentlemen, this is why Helena was the one we saw in last week's episode. No, I'm just kidding. Or am I? We cut to the next morning where we see Mark gets the message from his sister inviting him to go to breakfast. Meanwhile, the early bird gets the worm as we watch Dylan heads to the great doors for an interview for a new job. I find it ironic that he's going to a place with doors in the name because, as they say, one door closes and another one opens. Now, it's important to note that we haven't spent that much time with Outie Dylan, and I want to point out his nervousness in this scene, and I want to say that there's a lack of confidence on his Outie's version as he looks in the mirror and he hypes himself up and he has to remind himself to smile. Again, going back to the great acting from these actors playing their Ennies and their Outies, I think any Dylan would have never did this. His first stop probably would have been to join a bodybuilding competition to show just how incredibly strong he is, with him having the strength of two men and all. Now inside, we see this is clearly the best he can do with such short notice after losing his job and looking at this company that is known for making doors. Now as the interviewer looks over his resume, he questions his love of doors, and they have a bit of a funny moment about their appreciation of a good door, and this shot here to me almost mirrors them as being like very similar people, and even the interviewer says that, and things are going pretty well for Dylan. There's even a mention of their Friday night kickball team, but unfortunately he notices his time at Lumon as Dylan lets him know that he's been severed, and you immediately see the change of the mood of the conversation, and the friendliness goes straight out of the door. First off, the interviewer wasn't a fan of how Lumon makes their own doors, but he also says he's looking for a certain person, not two people, and mocks his decision to getting severed. This scene to me continues to show us how the outside perspective of those who hate the idea of being severed, and the shame that those show to the type of person who has that done. This is also the show's subtle commentary about discrimination against people who identify as one way or are part of a certain group or makes decisions that are looked down upon. Which, by the way, for those keeping track at home, yet another lie confirmed by Milchick. Remember how famous the team's Outies were to the outside world? Well, we can clearly see that that was another damn lie. Now, back in the car, I questioned last week if Dylan actually had a wife who went by the name of Gretchen, and I wasn't sure if maybe Lumon made her up. Well, lo and behold, she actually is real. Now, she seems to be very calm and loving and supportive as we learn that he's got a newborn baby, as he mentions that he has to go get some baby wipes. I want to go back to the interview as we kind of learn that Dylan is a person of skill. He's capable of making or possibly designing doors, which may come into handy at some point in this season. Now, as a fan of watching The Walking Dead for many years and having had seen episodes of Nurse Jackie and a ton of her movies, I recognize the voice of Gretchen, and it's Merritt Weaver. She is such a great actor, and I bet it's just a matter of time before we see her making her on-screen appearance in the show. Now at the diner, Mark and Devin talk about Cobell briefly as she still struggles with believing she's alive was about her baby Eleanor. Devin mentions a Denise who's a lawyer, and she says that she would like to speak with any Mark to get more information, but Mark lets her know that he's quitting. Now Devin isn't on board with this decision and believes that any Mark might know something about Gemma. Now the conversation takes a bit of a turn and we get this sibling fight when Devin mentions that Gemma was her family too, and Mark pushes back and reminds her that their pain isn't the same and that there's no us when it comes to getting closure or exploring if there's something that any Mark possibly knows about Gemma. Now after raising his voice and lightly smacking his hands on the table, we see Mark leaves, but we also notice that Mr. Drummond was there listening closely into their conversation, remembering that Lumon is is listening literally. Now, it's safe to assume that Devin will probably now be on his radar this season, and honestly, I really hope that Devin gets more to do this season and gets more of a character development because she's such a great character. Now, before moving on, I have to point out the hand tattoo on Mr. Drummond, which is Frolic, as we know as one of the Four Tempers by Keir Egan. And to have that tattoo on his hand is interesting, but even more interesting is the fact that Frolic means cheerful, merry, or playful. I definitely would not have taken him as a playful or cheerful individual. He gives more of a dread vibe to me. Again, I'm assuming he's the family bodyguard, but seeing him in meetings and Helena consulting with him makes me think that he's more important than just a bodyguard. I'm very interested to seeing and learning more about this Mr. Drummond. Now back at home, we see Mark feeding his fish, which by the way, there's definitely got to be some backstory to these fishes, and it may have some ties to Gemma. She might have given him these fishes as a gift, but we get the reverse of what Colbell would do to Mark, which is spying on him from her window as we see Mark doing this to her. Now we cut to Irving, who's making a phone call in a phone booth, and it's not too far away from his house, but we can clearly see that he doesn't want this phone call tracked or listened to, and he's being very secretive. Now without subtitles, I wouldn't have known what was said, but luckily I did. According to my subtitles, Irvin says on the phone, "You're not picking up, and I get it. I want you to know that my innie got the message." Now as he hangs up, he notices a car pulls up, and it's actually Bert. First off, how did Bert find him? Does this spark the rumored idea or theory that they've met before and they have this strong connection that brings them together, but Lumon keeps resetting their memories to forget one another? Now, wouldn't it be crazy if they actually knew each other in the outside world and they actually hated each other? But I also want to point out that maybe Bert knowing where he lived could point to the fact that Bert answered the door in the finale and they may have spoken before Irving left. But more importantly, who the hell was Irving on the phone with? Was that the scientist we met back in season 1 in Rugabi? Was the message the paintings that he drew on the elevator? I think we can all agree that Irvin may have worked on the testing for or has connections to the dark hallway with the elevator. Outie Irvin's reveal in the finale showed us that he definitely knows more about the company than a lot of the other Outies know about Lumon's nefarious deeds, and the phone call definitely confirms that he's gonna have some type of major reveal coming this season. It makes me wonder if the Lexington letters will ever connect to the show and have any ties to the events, and Irving could be looking for the man in the photos that he collected, or what if he knew Peggy? Now back with Mark, who's finally about to change the light bulb that's been out since season 1, he gets a knock on the door and it's Milchick with the famous pineapple from the pineapple bobbing seen in a Lumon listening video. Milchick is here to see if he's made up his mind about returning or leaving the company. He asks if Mark is happy with his current pay scale and offers him a 20% raise upon returning. He also offers a full investigation on his innie's claims and regular wellness checks for his innie, but the biggest question and the last one relates to Gemma. He asks if he remembers what he said upon joining Lumon, as Milchick says,
You said since she died, every day feels like a year. That you felt like you were choking on her ghost. Do you still feel that way, Mr. Scout?
As we watch the master manipulator at work using Mark's words describing his recently deceased wife was just crazy work to me, as he tells Mark that his innie's found love and his solace he's given his innie will eventually make its way to the surface. He's got to just give them time. Going back to that last line, giving them time. Did Milchick just open up the can of worms that suggest that Lumon is working on a way to giving Mark his happiness back in the form of his wife and Gemma? Was he referring to the Cold Harbor file? Now next morning Mark returns, which again, keeping track, another lie confirmed, the whole "it's been 5 months" seems like it was just a few days at best. I felt like maybe even a weekend passed because Milchick arrived at Devin's house and said that he'll see Mark on Monday, which to me just confirms that he visited them on a Friday. But again, I just want to point out that it wasn't 5 months like he told any Mark. Now, the events from last episode are catching up as Mark enters the building and we see Helena watches Mark from above. As we see Milchick, Natalie, and Mr. Drummond discussing satisfaction with Mark's return, here my theory gets debunked about the replacements as we learn that Dario was an overseas floater and Gwendolyn and Mark W. were indeed let go from 5X branch, and they were recruited by Milchick with little to much time on bringing them to the new team. Again, my timeline seems legit as Milchick confirms that it's been 48 hours since the OTC incident, as the 5 ex-employees seem to be a joke to the higher-ups as Drummond makes a remark about them being chosen as the replacements. As we watch them make their way into work, Milchick hopes that there's going to be some chemistry found amongst his new team. But Helena says that the chemistry doesn't matter, they just need Mark on his A-game to complete Cold Harbor, the file that we saw him working on in the final moments of the premiere episode. As we watch Mark's Outie's perspective going in and out of work based on the events we saw in episode 1 of what was going on outside, this pretty much debunking another theory I had, and that was Mark not being able to leave the building or being kept hostage somewhere, as we finally see the switch from when Mark called the board and he was sent home early by Milchick. As Outie Mark is so used to the routine of coming in and going out, he doesn't even realize that it's still morning when he says goodbye to Judd, saying goodnight. You see Helena and Drummond and Milchick listening to Mark's message to the board as the board agreed to his terms, including the return of Heliar. As they say that Mark wouldn't finish Cold Harbor without his team, as we see Milchick rehiring Dylan and Irvin. It might just be me, but this look on Helena's face doesn't look like a look of disappointment. I think she's happy for an innie. As Outie Mark arrives to work, we see an upset Mark W. cursing about being let go after 3 days of work, and he mentions he broke his lease in Grand Rapids, which is in Michigan, which I assume Branch 5X is located. As he leaves, he says this gives him another reason to sue Lumon, and he leaves by giving them a message on the count of 3, everyone. 3, 2, 1.
Fuck you, Lumon!
As we approach the final moments of the episode, we finally catch up with the final moments of last week, and we see the staggering of the Outies taking place from the outside as Mark arrives first, and like we saw, in comes Dylan, followed by Irvin, and lastly, the big question of if it was Helly or Helena. We see Helena saying good morning to Judd, she puts her belongings away, we see her enter the elevator, and it appears to be Helly. Now, my Outie wants to make it clear that that seemed to be Helly, but my innie can't shake the idea that Helena's bypassed the elevator's severed barrier and she wants a taste of Helly R and Mark's love story. Is there a possibility that her chip can be defective? Can she have it turned on or turned off? I really like this comment here that was left in my recent theory video, as they said they definitely think that it's Helena. They said that her even pointing out the security cameras are gone, and that could reflect that she's a replacement for the cameras and the microphone. As we end the episode with Mark headed home, he pulls into his driveway and he sees Cobell leaving. She acts like nothing happened and she's headed out with her packed bags. I'm assuming she's either taking the new position or leaving Lumon in this town altogether. I personally believe that she is taking the new job, the new position, but Mark doesn't let her leave that easily. As he questions who she really is and how he's shared all this personal information over these years, and he's even ate her crappy cookies. We watch as she mocks him about staying with the company, which if she does come back and take the position, she's being a hypocrite, but she pokes fun of the pineapple being used to pull him back in. Now, as she pulls out of her driveway and drives off, we see Mark jumps in front of her car and yells what's all going on and brings up Gemma. Now, Cobell doesn't respond, but the silence says it all as she screams and drives away, leaving Mark to believe that his sister was onto something with his innie maybe knowing what happened to Gemma, and Cobell's reaction proves that. Now, I could be looking too much into this, but the visual of seeing him jumping in front of her car made me get this feeling that the show may have given us a clue to what may have happened to Gemma. Now, my working theory isn't fully mapped out, but I've said before that maybe Gemma worked for Lumon before Mark, or secretly worked for them during their relationship when they were together and married, and like the Lexington letter, Peggy and also Petey, she found out something about what Lumon was doing, and Cobell, being the company guard dog, tried to stop her, and one thing led to another, and Cobell hit her with her car, or at the very least she had something to do with the car accident. Now, feeling guilty, Cobell took an interest in bringing Gemma back, or at least one version of her being brought back for Mark, and that's his any version, and that being Miss Casey, but secretly this little project has something to do with her connection to Charlotte Cobell. Now, next week's episode is titled Who is Alive, and the synopsis reads, Mark and Helly return to an old haunt. While Irvin and Dylan make separate discoveries, Outie Mark tries something new, Sounds like a lot of fun to me. Now, as far as my review of this episode goes, I really like the change of pace with these last 2 episodes and really separating us with seeing one episode being from the Innie's perspective and obviously this episode being from the Outie's perspective. Now, this might be a hot take, but as far as season 1 is concerned, me personally, I've always preferred the Innie storyline versus the Outie's. I'm not saying the Outie storyline is bad. I just thought that the Innie storyline was just way more compelling in my personal opinion. But with that said, I really like seeing the outside lives of Dylan in this episode and also Irving. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm a fan of Devin. So I really think this season will do, at least to me, will do a better job for making me care equally for both what's happening in the inside of Lumon as well as the outside of Lumon. I think that's a perfect spot to end this video. Again, I like that we kick this season off with really putting the emphasis on the differences of the Innie's lives and their Outie's lives and setting the stage for the rest of the season. Did Cobell accept a new position? What role will Mr. Drummond play? Will Helena play a bigger part in observing Helly and Mark's relationship? And will Helena maybe even pursue Mark in his Outie form? With all that said, it is now your turn to go wild in the comments from your Innies and your Outie's thoughts about this episode. Was there anything that I missed in this week's breakdown? What were you all's thoughts and opinions and theories and deeper meanings you all took away from this episode? Now, I shared your comments in my last theory video and I had a lot of fun doing that, and it seemed like you all enjoyed that as well. So let's run it back for the next one. Definitely let me know your theories so I can share them in this week's coming theory video. Now, if you all enjoyed my breakdown, please hit the like button. Let's try to hit 700 likes on this video. Please consider sharing this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about this show. And if this is your first time watching and joining the channel, welcome. Let's keep the fun going and stick around by subscribing today. And if you all want to support the channel even more, consider joining the channel memberships, where I plan on having exclusive Severance content there coming soon. There may be an exclusive after show coming, or maybe even a watch party. Again, if it's not already on the channel, stay tuned for my video about the new opening credits, followed by a theory video about the episode in the coming days. Remember, you all are awesome, stay safe, and also remember,
every time you find yourself here, it's because you chose to come back.